Hello and welcome to the Out Scotland podcast. My name is Ryan Catterson.
And mine is Matthew Young.
So, happy Pride Month, Matt.
Happy Pride Month
happy
to
Pride
you
Month,
too.
everybody. What a lovely time to be a queer in June, of course.
Sun's out.
I'm also, if you're watching this, I've purposefully worn my Lesbian and Gays Support the Miners t-shirt. If you haven't seen the movie Pride, I think we both recommend it, actually.
Perhaps my favourite movie
Ever.
Yeah. If you need a good cry and a smile, it is the perfect film.
I seem to watch it at Christmas time. I don't know why, and then it has some correlation to Christmas for me. I also did write half my dissertation on that film, so I did watch it maybe about 12 times.
It gets better every time.
No, it does. It's excellent. It's really good. So today we are talking about Pride, not the film, sadly. Well, I guess we did a bit. But we're going to talk about Pride in Scotland, and I have been chatting with Duncan Hothersall, who was one of the organisers of the first ever Pride in Scotland, which was 30 years ago, on the 17th of June, I believe, 1995 in Edinburgh. So a big milestone for Pride in Scotland, I guess. So yeah, he was sort of co-founder, I guess, of that in making that happen, and obviously Pride has happened somewhere in Scotland every year since, and now there are a lot of Prides across Scotland, which is really, really great and really cool. So yeah, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Duncan to learn a little bit more about the history of Pride, not just for Edinburgh but for all of Scotland. Thanks so much, Duncan, for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So, first thing, I'd love to sort of just dive in with asking you to sort of take us back to sort of 1995 or even just before that, and sort of what sparked the idea between you and I believe it was one of your student friends, Laura, as well, to organise the first ever Pride March in Scotland.
Yeah, so that's potentially a very long answer, but I'll try and do the potted version. So we there'd obviously been Lark in the Park in late 80s in response to Section 28, and then there was a sort of a third event done in 92, which was there wasn't a march and it wasn't intending to be a pride, but it was a big show of LGBT at that point, sort of visibility in Edinburgh. Laura and I knew the folk who were running Pride Trust in London quite well, and we a couple of years we arranged a sort of set of stewards to come down, because they were always desperate for people to steward Pride, because people don't want to do it because they want to get drunk and enjoy themselves. So we used to, a couple of years, we took down a sort of busload of folk, and it was on the return journey of one of those in 93, I think, that Laura and I were in the car and we were talking about doing a fundraiser for Pride London, and then we went, well, actually, we should just do a Pride. And we were stupid enough and young enough not to realise just what a ridiculously complicated and expensive thing that would be to do. So we decided we would. So,
Brilliant.
That was it.
For you then, like, what, obviously, if you were obviously going to London and experiencing Pride there, but I guess in a Scottish perspective, what was the social, political atmosphere like for you and more broadly the community, did you feel at that time? Obviously, you mentioned Section 28 and Lark in the Park and events that had already taken place, but what particularly, at that point, obviously you say you were young and naive enough to be like, right, we'll just do one, but was there any sort of, I guess, political motivation there, say, as well?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you've got to take yourself back and I have to remember what the context was there. I remember there were 2 or 3 gay venues in Edinburgh. The Laughing Duck always sticks out, but there was a gay scene in Edinburgh, but the clubs were literally places with a blank door with private on, and you had to knock, and somebody would open a latch and see if you were. Well, actually, that depended. They either saw if you look gay or saw if you look cute, I think, was the criteria for getting
More
in.
policy there.
So it was very, there wasn't the same visibility, and certainly when we started talking to people about a march through Edinburgh, there were a lot of intakes of breath because you were asking people. I mean, there's huge power in bringing people together to be visible, and it gives a certain, community and a sense of anonymity in a way. But you were asking people to stand up and say, I'm living as an LGBT person, and I exist in this city, and I want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
And there was plenty of people who said it wouldn't happen.
Yeah,
always there would be. One sort of venerable community member I remember in '95 said, I don't know why you're doing it in Edinburgh, you should do it in Glasgow because that's where the scene is. And we'd always decided it was going to alternate. So it was Pride Scotland, it wasn't Pride Edinburgh in those days. And in '96, when we did it in Glasgow, the same guy said, oh, I don't know why you want to do it in Glasgow. Politics is all in Edinburgh these days. And there was a lot of that. It wasn't it wasn't aggression, or it was just people were very wary of it. And it was, it felt like a brave thing to do for a lot of people. And obviously for us, that political context, it's before the equalisation of the age of consent even. Civil partnerships and equal marriage are nowhere near the agenda. We were about to go into a fight against consenting gay sex acts being making people liable to go on the paedophile register. That was the legal social context we were in, and the Sun was still printing horrors about gay people. So from there's a concern in the community there, but also from our point of view as organisers, we were trying to organise something for hundreds of people, and you've got to at some point decide we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
And it's not until the day that you know whether you've got those people. So there were a lot of moments along the way where you're thinking, what the hell are we doing?
Then also for you personally, was there any element of that sort of, maybe not fear, but like you mentioned, sort of putting yourself out there and saying, not only are you a part of it, but you're, sort of running this, and you're getting possible pushback from within the community. Was there any part of you that was worried about, your own personal interests in it, and what it could mean for you should it, not be a success, or should there be negative press or reaction?
It's a good question. I think the honest answer is no. I was 22. I had come out when I was 19, and in that context, before I came out to myself, I was brought up in a Catholic family. It was a very essentially low-level homophobic environment, Catholic schooling and all of that. But in terms of how I came out to myself, I never actually, I had a very condensed period of personal angst. And then I just decided this is me.
Yeah.
And beyond that point, I honestly did not, I had all the confidence of a early 20s sort of, I can do whatever I want. And so, no, I personally, I didn't, although I did a lot of press for the first time in the run-up in 94 and 95. And it was clear that there were a lot of people who were going, you do a phone in with a Tory MP and you get exactly what you would expect. But I have to confess, I absolutely loved it because I like a good argument, and I relished that bit of it. And I never felt, probably not until just in the run-up when the police got in touch and said they'd had some credible threats, and at that point you're starting to go a little bit wobbly, but I never really felt much of that. We just ploughed on. Apart from anything else, there was too much to do.
Yeah,
I mean, it was we were working obviously at the same time, and so every hour of it outside of work was spent on this. And yeah, you didn't have much time to be worried about personal safety or any nonsense like that.
How was it then, you mentioned like the police and stuff like that, obviously. How was it in terms of the logistics of it, of the actual time? Were police and the local authority and things sort of on board or pushing back or somewhere in between?
So yeah, there was a mixture, although Laura was really the key to unlocking a lot of that. She did a lot of the what you might call grown-up meetings. Um, and but what we did do quite carefully was sort of select people we thought would be champions for us, and in the council. And we'd already done. I'd been involved. I mean, this is the sort of background was there was all sorts of things going on in the community. There was Outright Scotland. Within a year of Pride, the Equality Network would be set up. There was the ACPOS LGBT liaison committee with the police.
Mhm.
And so all of that was around. And I think the best way I can put it is that the mood music, even though we were so far behind legislatively, a lot of the big changes hadn't happened.
Mhm.
The direction of travel felt securely forward. It's a big
Yep.
contrast to where we are now, where the direction of travel feels quite firmly backward. And so it was that context that I think allowed us to just say to the police, right, this is the route we want. And there was certainly back and forth about it, although I have a very fond recollection of, I think there was what was it? A loyalist march the weekend before. I remember seeing pictures that there was more police than marchers. There was like maybe 200 people in the march, and they had about 250 police around them. And the chap who we were liaising with said, "You realise next week, I don't know how many of you there are going to be, but there's only going to be about 10 of us, so you better behave." And they just weren't worried about it. But there were people in the council, there were people in the police that were obviously homophobic and didn't want to support it. But we managed to find the people who would be our champions. And you got to say we couldn't have done a lot of it without that sort of support in those sorts of institutions.
You mentioned obviously where we're at now, I guess, as a community and politically in the past 30 years on the sort of positive note then, from 95 to now, so much has come along in a positive way, marriage equality, hate crime laws, etc. What from those 30 years, what would you say is sort of the proudest thing to have witnessed and technically be a part of in creating happen?
That's an interesting question. It's hard to the I mean, I was festival director, so I never got to go on the first Pride. In fact, I didn't get to go on a Pride in Scotland until '99
Oh
when
wow.
I stood down. So it was a very proud moment to go on my
Hmm.
first Pride
Hmm.
march in Scotland. Um,
How
I
did that
think,
go then from having been the sort of role of organizing to then actually as you say maybe letting your hair down a little bit and enjoying yourself?
yeah, it was a bit weird actually. Also, it was in Glasgow, which I would have preferred. No, hang on, no, must be '98 was the first one. Sorry,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. But the first one I was in Glasgow, which was, I would have liked it to have been where I lived. But
Yeah.
no, it was special.
Mm.
I think they got me to hold part of the banner at the
Mm.
front, and it felt nice to be able to actually, you know, when you're doing it, when you're in charge of it, it's a very different experience to being in the thick of
Mm.
it.
Mhm.
And there's a lot you get out of running things like that and being a volunteer and having a team, building a team. But yeah, it was quite special to be on that first
Mm.
one once I wasn't responsible for it. And then I suppose the other one I would have to say was probably equal marriage. I mean, all of these legal steps forward have been really important. Repeal of Section 28 in Scotland was really, really important, and possibly even the Bank of Scotland campaign against Pat Robertson is up there as well. But I think the equal marriage in the Scottish Parliament, there was a lump in my throat on that day for sure, and it, you do feel on those sorts of moments that the world is reaching a point that it's a better place. And yeah, I don't want to put the downer on the end of that sentence, but it doesn't always last.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was quite young when equal marriage did pass, but I had actually already come out to my family prior to it happening, and I was sort of aware that I couldn't possibly get married, here, even, and obviously I was so young that I wouldn't be allowed to get married anyway at that point, but I knew that wasn't in, the pipeline, that wasn't a possibility, and then it was, and as a young person seeing that happen, it very much felt, people are on the right side here, people are showing up, and that's what matters, but yeah,
I think there's a power in the word marriage as well, because it is so established in society. I remember friends of ours who were the first male couple to get civil partnered, and then they converted it in due time. But when they got civil partnered, I remember one of them was saying he was walking down the street and bumped into a bunch of kids. This was in Kirkcaldy, not, a little bit rough in parts. And these kids were, honest working class kids, and looking a little bit threatening. And actually what they said to him was, how does it feel to be married? And it's sort of like, that's about the concept. Everybody knows what marriage is. Yeah. It's the power of that I think was very moving and very important, really important.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously touching on where we're at now. What do you think? Well, why do you think that pride, I guess, still matters in Scotland today, especially for younger people, or as we sort of mentioned, sort of more marginalised members of the community, in this current climate?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a really horrible position now where there is pushback against established rights for members of the LGBT community, and there's no question that we have to focus on what's happening to the trans community, because that is real and it's horrendous and it's being perpetrated by people who should know better. But it's also part of a much broader attack on LGBT people, also on ethnic minorities and on women. This is an agenda that is much broader, but the tip of the sword at this point is trans rights. And I think where pride is powerful is that bringing together of the community, that assertion that we are LGB with the T, because that, incidentally, the first Pride Scotland was LGB in 95, and by 96 it was LGBT. And I've had a number of people saying to me, doesn't that just prove that they were separate and they were bunged together? And I pointed out that a few years previously it was lesbian and gay. And actually the process of including more people is not a negative, it's a positive. But it's so important that the whole community, and that's what Pride does, it brings the whole community together. And much as there are quite clever attempts to sort of divide and conquer, the astroturfing like the LGBT Alliance, the reality is the LGBT community is almost completely supportive and inclusive of trans people, and and that message can come across from Pride as well. And I think the stance that's been taken by a lot of prides across the UK that's basically said we don't want any political parties coming anymore because you've let us down. I know some people are upset by that, but I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. It doesn't stop queer individuals attending, but you can't start flying the flag for a party that's actively participating in the oppression of our community. So Pride is really. I read something recently about a Pride event in Florida, and obviously they're in the States. They're facing perhaps they're a little bit further forward in the anti-trans legislative process, and they really are harming people very badly. And they used to light up the bridges. I forget exactly where it was, but they used to light up the bridges as a rainbow with the consent of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And the city this year had removed its consent, much like many sponsors have removed their money.
Yeah.
And what I thought was so powerful was that the march instead organised for handheld lights in rainbow and trans Progress Pride colours, and they just stood on the bridge and lit it up themselves. And I think that's a huge, a great metaphor for what the community is doing, because as the old saying has it, Stonewall was a riot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I went to my first Pride when I was 16 in 2017, and it very much felt, there was corporate sponsors and corporate presence was very much a part of it. But now, hearing stories, I think it's in Liverpool, a lot of corporate sponsors are sort of moving away from supporting, providing money essentially for these things to go ahead, and it does mean that things either have to be scaled back or whatever, but the power is still very much in the people and in the community, is that these things don't have to be big massive festivals,
absolutely,
chats and big stages and all of that. You can go on your march and organize and talk to folk, and then go to the pub and have a drink if you want to, and that that's the spirit of it, is the power of it, is as you say, not just people from the LGBT community, but a broad spectrum of people coming together and saying, we have the power to light up a bridge, we have the power to do these things
exactly
if we want to.
Exactly.
And that's a great story. I guess the last thing I would want to touch on is, what are your hopes for the next 30 years of Pride in Scotland and beyond, I guess?
Well, I mean, I remember being struck a couple of years ago at the number of Pride events and the breadth of Pride events across Scotland. We would never have dreamed. We wanted it to be called Pride Scotland because it was going to be in Glasgow and Edinburgh.
Yeah.
There were nascent things happening in Aberdeen and Inverness.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that, Arran Pride?
That's the one I was gonna note. Yeah.
There was one in Orkney, I think.
Yeah.
And there's like 30 or something.
Yeah.
It's
incredible.
And even,
Trans Pride Scotland, it travels to different places.
Yeah.
It was in Kilmarnock recently, and
it's fantastic. That's I would love to see more of that. I would love to see more of that sort of community rooted work that, as you were talking about before, sort of you don't have to have a huge budget. I mean, it does cost. You have to fundraise, and there's no getting around that.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have a stage with big acts. You can do it in a different way. And I think that, I would hope that continues. I would hope the community stays united against what we are facing, because there's no question we are all facing it, even if we pretend otherwise, as some people do. I hope that we can go back in some senses, perhaps 10 years to where to before this anti-trans moral panic was created. But I think in reality we have to face up that it's going to get worse before it gets better at this point. Mm-hmm. So I really hope that Pride helps us to get through the worst and to the better.
Perfect. That's a lovely note. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So that was my chat with Duncan. I think for me it was really, really interesting and cool to sort of find out where Pride started, you know, to see from someone who's been there from the start, you know, how it's ended up where it is and why, you know, it was so important then and is still so important now. I went to my first Pride in 2017, so I was 16 when I went to that. And I think it must have been the year prior I had like seen Pride for the first time, and I saw the march, and I remember thinking, like, I don't know if that's something I would ever want to be a part of or feel comfortable being a part of. But obviously, well, I didn't know the history, I guess, then of Pride, you know, more widely, but also in Scotland. But yeah, then I went to the first one and I had a great time. What about yourself?
I've yet to go.
Yeah.
Which is mad. To be honest, last year I was planning on going, but I was working.
I've been in that many times, but then you just, you know,
I know.
You go to the after thing.
It's booked off this year.
Okay,
but
good.
I
Same
remember working in a pub in Glasgow when it was on.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of walking. I walked outside to have a cigarette, and I saw these people walking past, and it looked so much fun.
Yeah.
And I was openly gay at the time, and I looked at it and I was like, I'd like to go to that one day. I didn't feel confident enough at the time, but I mean now I'm really looking forward to going to my first one, and I think it will be. I don't really know what to expect. I do in some ways, I do in some don't.
You can't expect me to have a whistle.
Whistle.
That's specifically for Pride.
Yeah.
So bring out the whistle. We get on the streets and make a lot of noise.
That sounds fun.
I think also it's really important to touch on what Duncan mentioned about how, you know, in the beginning, you know, the first sort of Pride movement in Scotland that he was a part of was sort of lesbian and gay, and then that started to include the bisexual community, and then started to include the transgender community by name. You know, obviously, I assume that people were there under the umbrella of, you know, it just being a lesbian and gay event that we're neither lesbian nor gay. But he mentions how, you know, people now will say, oh, but it began as just LGB without the T, and obviously he stresses how important it is that is the case, and obviously I know that we both agree with that. But I guess to talk about maybe a wee bit where we are currently politically, socially, culture war-y, you know, why it is so important, and obviously, like, if this year is going to be your first Pride, like, how important it is for you, for us, for everyone to show up together as a community.
I think there has been no moment where it is more important. I think you've seen the culture war issue evolve over the last over the last decade. Yeah. But now it's got real in terms of legislative, like reducing the rights of
going
people.
Going backwards, yeah.
And our rights as gay men are pretty secure in the terms of public opinion. Yeah. And that means they won't become eroded, but trans people's rights are literally being eroded in front of our eyes, and I think now is the time where everyone has to come together and stand up for these people who are a part of our community. And if you lose that sense of community, you lose everything. Yeah, absolutely. And these are, you know, this is a group of people that have shown up for our people historically, you know, and in terms, you know, socially, they're also linked as well. An attack on one section of the queer community is really an attack on it all, because it is also interlinked, and everyone's identity, I guess, intersects maybe with different identities, and it, you know, it is just a dangerous precedent that you know, one group can be so under attack. You know, it is so important that we all show up for each other.